The risks of breeding dogs. As you sit in your living room playing with your dog, it's easy to ponder what the puppies may look like. Or maybe you don't have a puppy and you're contemplating whether to get one from a breeder or adopt one from a shelter. It is, however, an obstacle when you realize the dog you bred or the dog you bought has hip dysplasia or obstructive airway syndrome. Or maybe you're walking through the shelter and you notice the wide abundance of dogs. This can stick you with a huge amount of vet bills and a copious amount of responsibility. Many of you love dogs. You want dogs, or maybe you want your dogs to have puppies. It is important to understand the risks and the consequences before making a commitment. I work at Animal Medical Clinic and I've seen various surgeries, been the caregiver of sick and recovering animals, and I've seen a lot of consequences due to poor breeding. Therefore, I find it my responsibility to inform people of these risks. I've also been the partial owner of a dog named Django, who is a French Bulldog who suffered from very breed-specific risks. Today I'll be going over the risks of breeding that lead to overpopulation, inbreeding, and complications of brachycephalic breeds. First, overpopulation. There is a drastic amount of animals that enter the animal shelter and are euthanized each year. This is primarily due to surrender, and this can cause overpopulation. Breeding may pose a risk to this population. According to the Animal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty in Animals, a nationally recognized animal welfare association, approximately 6.3 million companion animals enter the shelter each year. Approximately 920,000 of these are euthanized. This immense amount of entering and euthanization in a shelter can be risked by breeding, and this is because breeding may cause less animals to be adopted from the shelter, or these bred dogs may end up in the shelter themselves. Next, I'll be talking about inbreeding. Inbreeding often occurs in purebred breeds, and this is primarily due to breeders targeting desired traits, and these desired traits are often made by taking dogs of the same descent and breeding them, and this can cause genetic mutations, and this can pose health risks to your dog. According to Donner and others, researchers conducting clinical studies on Mendelian disease variants, one mechanism in which inbreeding depression can act is through the accumulation of delirious recessive mutations that negatively impact health and fertility of the individual. When inbreeding occurs, the dog may suffer from these recessive mutations. This can cause a poor quality of life and poor quality of health. According to the same researchers, breeds with higher than average inbreeding cause more vet bills. This poor recessive genes that cause more vet bills than a healthy dog can cause a more physical, mental, and financial burden and responsibility on the owner of the dog. And this is why it's important to understand the breeding practices of a breeder. Next, I'll be talking about brachycephalic syndrome. Brachycephalic syndrome is often common in dogs with smushed faces, and this includes boxers, pugs, French Bulldogs, English Bulldogs. And these dogs deal with a lot of high risk in internal and external complications. According to Dr. Smith, a vet of 35 plus years, French Bulldogs often go through or have a poor musculoskeletal anatomy, and this is from selective breeding. This often means that breeders will target for French Bulldogs wider shoulders but a smaller waist. This causes about 90% of female French Bulldogs who are pregnant to need a C-section. They cannot often give birth naturally, and this is due to many of them will have almost like a blockage, or the puppies may get stuck in the canal. These dogs also may suffer from poor upper airway, excessive soft tissues, undershot jaw, squished faces, narrow nostrils, elongated soft palates, and this all makes it harder to breathe. C-sections are a high risk, but on top of that, anesthesia is also a high risk for these breeds due to their narrow trachea. These dogs often also need soft palate resection surgery, and this can cause an extremely high amount of money. Django, our French Bulldog, who we had for a couple of years before he passed away, he suffered from seizures. He could not eat without throwing up, he couldn't jump, he couldn't bark, and he was AKC registered and cost about $3,000. However, due to poor breeding practices, this could not ensure his health. Now that I am educated, I would never buy a breed of dog without being aware of the practices, precautions, and tactics of the breeder. I know Django, due to poor breeding, had a poor quality of life. Today I have provided an overview of the risks of breeding dogs that lead to overpopulation, inbreeding, and brachycephalic complications. After listening, I hope that people consider the financial and emotional burden that comes from not being educated. I hope people consider neutering, spaying, or adopting, or they may find a responsible breeder that takes precautionary measures on ensuring the health of their puppies. Thank you for listening, and I wish you and your fur babies well.